Viktor Frankl is a psychiatrist who lived through one of the most terrifying events in the course of human history: the Holocaust. Experiencing the horror of Nazi Germany and surviving 4 separate concentration camps, Frankl's life was turned upside down. There is, however, more to his story than just survival. This is the meaning of life in a death camp. On March 26, 1905, Viktor Frankl was born the middle child of 3. His father a civil servant in Vienna, and his mother a tender-hearted woman from Prague. At just 3 years old, Frankl decided to become a physician. In 1914, when Frankl was 9 years old, the First World War began. His family would experience bitter poverty, periodically begging farmers for food. However, this would not stop Frankl's fascination with life from blossoming. In junior high, he started studying philosophy as well as taking night classes in psychology. At 15 years old, he had already delivered a lecture regarding the meaning of life. Around this time, he started building a connection with the infamous founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. Frankl's promising future and rapid growth did not stop there, however. After his high school graduation essay titled The Psychology of Philosophical Thought, Frankl sent a manuscript of his to Freud, which would go on to get published in the International Journal of Psychoanalysis. While Frankl was delighted, he himself was fascinated with another pioneer in the field, someone who had occupied an apartment that was just across the street from his birthplace. In 1902, 3 years before the birth of Frankl, a man named Alfred Adler with 3 others joined Sigmund Freud in a discussion group. While Freud saw Adler as one of his first disciples, Adler knew that his ideas were separate from that of Freud. One of their main disagreements, which is relevant here, lied in the fact that Freud believed that the primary human drive was pleasure, while Adler believed the motivation behind humans was power. Amongst other things, this would lead Adler to break ties with Freud in 1911 and start his own group the subsequent year, called the Society of Individual Psychology. Around a decade later, Frankl would eventually start regularly attending Adler's psychology group. Although he was the youngest member of the circle, Adler urged him to publish papers within the association. However, Frankl slowly started to lose favor with the group as he started developing his own theory. As he grew, Frankl remained critical of Adler's central tenets, which would eventually lead him to siding with 2 men whose views were opposed to that of Adler. Frankl was soon expelled. Refusing to be discouraged, Frankl continued developing his own theories. Ultimately, the research he had done then would become the foundation of the 3rd school of Viennese psychotherapy after the ones developed by Freud and Adler, which would eventually be called logotherapy.
Dr. Frankl, what is meant by logotherapy?
Therapy means healing, and logos means meaning. Thus, logotherapy is really healing through meaning, although this, of course, is an oversimplification.
At the age of 25, he helped organize counseling centers in Vienna, which by the subsequent year would drop the suicides to 0. From 1933 to 1937, Frankl treated about 3,000 patients per year. In 1938, 1 year before the official start of World War II, the Nazis crossed the border into Austria. However, even with the Nazis' restrictions on his work as a doctor, he was granted a visa due to the professional recognition he had in the field. In the 1930s, due to clinics closing down and increasing volatility, his early mentors Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler had already fled to foreign countries. Frankl could do the same, but there was a problem. Although he had obtained his visa, his parents were not so lucky. When visiting his parents one fateful day, he noticed marble carvings that his father had retrieved from a nearby destroyed synagogue. On the inscription, there were 5 written words that would change the course of his life forever. Frankl let his visa expire. Continuing his work as a doctor, Frankl in 1941 met and eventually married Tilly Grosser. It was hard, but at least he had his family. Life was okay. In 1942, Frankl and his family were arrested. They were forced to move into the Terezin concentration camp, in which they faced disquieting hunger. From that point on, he became number 119,104. Frankl recalls being able to relate to his father's past when facing extreme starvation. Just half a year later, his father passed away. After father died in the camp and I was left alone with my mother, I made it my practice to kiss her whenever I met her and said goodbye to her. And when the time had come and I was deported to the Auschwitz death camp with my first wife, Tilly, I said farewell to my mother. While in the Auschwitz camp, Frankl would also lose his brother. Then, in the following year, he lost his wife. When he heard about the news, he wrote, "So now I'm all alone. I am terribly tired, terribly sad, terribly lonely. I have nothing more to hope for." Words cannot express the horrors and despair the victims of these camps had to experience. Through death and starvation becoming the norm, the prisoners of these camps entertained a single thought. The thought was entertained by nearly everyone, if only for a brief time. It was born of the hopelessness of the situation, the constant death looming over us daily and hourly, and the closeness of the deaths suffered by many of the others. Through the harsh realities, painful beatings, and bitter weather, the prisoners started to become apathetic towards one another. This was the reality of the day, and the future was a dream. The Nazis piled up mounds of eyeglasses, shoes, and clothing. Anything they thought could be useful was saved. The rest, the people that wore them, the stories behind each, these were not.
It was a virtually hopeless situation, and all my comrades asked themselves, will we survive? Because if not, everything is meaningless. And my question addressed to myself was just the contrary, the opposite. Is everything meaningful? Suffering, death, and so forth, all this tragic environment and circumstances, has everything an unconditional meaning? Because if not, survival would be meaningless.
What Frankl alludes to here is that no matter the circumstance in our life, there is meaning, there is reason to stay alive. Even in the midst of the Holocaust, there was hope. At the same time, however, Frankl acknowledged the pain and suffering around him. This seeming paradox of faith in the end, yet realism in the moment, is called the Stockdale paradox. Quote, "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be." Frankl notes that the ones that didn't make it out were the optimists, the ones that thought they would get out soon. In fact, he recalls that the holidays had the highest death rates, due to the prisoners' expectations being broken and disappointment overwhelming them. On the contrary, he observes that it was the ones with inner strength that would prevail. With this, Frankl says that it doesn't matter what we expect from life, whether we expect joy and happiness or pain and suffering. Rather, what is truly important is what life expects from us. Quote, "It is not we who are permitted to ask about the meaning of life. It is life that asks the questions, directs the questions at us. We are the ones who are questioned. We are the ones who must answer." In answering, Frankl believed that we must act justly, conduct ourselves well, and take responsibility for the problems life gives us. It was the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche who proclaimed that he who has a why to live for can bear it almost anyhow. And after a total of 3 years in 4 separate camps, Frankl was finally liberated. Finding meaning in even the harshest conditions, Frankl prevailed, turning his tragedy into triumph. He went on to publish his experience in the camps in one of the greatest works of the 20th century, Man's Search for Meaning. When it reached a bestseller status, he remarked, "If hundreds of thousands of people reach out for a book whose very title promises to deal with the question of the meaning of life, it must be a question that burns under their fingernails." Frankl also conducted numerous lectures, expanding on his theories and helping young people find purpose and direction in their lives. 2 years after he was liberated from the camps, he remarried. And according to Viktor Frankl, there were 3 ways to live a meaningful life. 1, by creating or doing something. 2, by experiencing, encountering, and loving another. And 3, our attitude in our lives towards suffering. But here, I want to focus on the last of the 3, finding meaning in our attitude towards suffering. No matter the situation in life, no matter the quantity of suffering, Frankl says, even to our dying breath, we are to choose our response to the situation. Therefore, in every hardship, in each struggle, there lies a choice. Quote, "We who lived in the concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken away from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way.